every aspect of what it is that we create have meaning to it. I think that it's a bit of a wasted opportunity to create something. And for our music and our albums, there's always a backstory. There's always something going on behind the scenes. And if our fans wanted to ever dig into it and discover something, there's something there to be discovered. And so that's something we've always felt was inspiring for us as we continue to create, continue to look for inspiration. And so creating these stories, creating these timelines, and just a narrative for the music to live inside of has always been something we've been excited about. So yes to all the things you're saying, and it's all there, and a fan wants to look into it and dive in, it's there. I mean, it goes without saying, this whole record was written in isolation. And using that word isolation and scaled back, it did seem like everything that was being created almost had a bit of a certain flavor to it, because there wasn't that in-person collaboration that you usually experience when making music. And so it was really inspired by being forced to be alone, being forced into one specific space. And the more you live in a space, the more you start noticing detail. Yeah, the vulture it's just an important part of the narrative of the record. In the city of Dima, the vulture represents so much to the inhabitants of Dima, because it's one of the only creatures they see that leaves and comes back. And it almost becomes a sense of inspiration to see that vulture leaving the wall of Dima and being able to fly wherever it wants, and yet it still comes back. And so if you're from Dima, you look at that vulture as kind of something that represents who you want to become. But at the same time, when you see a vulture up close, I don't know if you've ever seen one up close, but they're terrifying.
They're tall too. They're like my size, kind of.
Yeah, they're not pleasant. I think that's just the idea of coming face to face with the fear of leaving where you're from and how scary that could be. And so the vulture is a very important piece to the narrative of the record. And then also there's this whole other kind of deep dive into the narrative that really hasn't been talked about much, but the vulture represents a lot of the religion that's involved in the city of Dima, and is important to its existence. And so in a way it kind of has this double meaning of inspiration, but also kind of evil as well. And I don't have time to get into it. I will say that the Ned narrative is separate from, I guess, the Dima narrative. So I don't think that those two things exist at the same time. I guess we'll see. Ned's he's a sly little guy. He might wiggle his way in. But no, I can't tell you exactly what this next step is for what Ned is going to become, or what next. But he represents for me something. When you talk to us in this setting, we want to talk about food orders and what we do for fun. I think that when you listen to our music and you dive into our records, you get this really kind of heavy, dark feeling, which is what music was for me. Someone like Ned kind of falls in those front layers that we're still proud of. That's who we are. He's a little more lighthearted. What he represents is a little more lighthearted, and that's why we wanted to introduce him to you guys, so that you kind of got that side of us as well. We're not ready to talk about where we're going to go next with the next record. But touring is not the best place to be writing songs, but creating ideas that can eventually become songs with a narrative already kind of paved out is kind of where we are right now. So it's going to be hard for us to dive into any details. And for me, writing the record Trench, it was a giant, basically all of it was me trying to survive. I felt like I was going to be crushed at any moment trying to make that record. And so while writing the record and writing the song Bandito specifically, that phrase kept on coming up as just kind of the randomness for me to find the lyric, for me to find the melody inside of the music. And when it came time for me to be like, okay, now let me go find real words to make this make sense to all the normal people, I just had this moment. I was like, they're not normal either. Maybe they'll understand like what I was feeling, what emotion is inside of those those words that seem like nonsense right now. And nothing gets me more excited than being able to fill meaning with something that previously didn't have meaning. And so I guess that's where that phrase came from.
Did you ever think that the fans were going to decipher all of the symbolism during the break?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, no. It did happen pretty quickly. I feel like people caught on and discovered things, I think, way quicker than we thought that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Which was really cool.
You guys are a bunch of smart Pop-Tarts. Yeah, Ned, I've always felt like it's been an effective tool for me to create some sort of persona for the things that I'm trying to figure out, whether it's, an insecurity or something I'm struggling with, or maybe in this case, Ned kind of representing the flow of just being creative. It's a very tough thing to capture and wrap your mind around. I don't know, and it kind of, it just started to remind me of a character or a creature that I couldn't quite understand or wrap my mind around, but was constantly trying to please, was constantly trying to wrangle and tame. And so all of those things going into what it takes to create something is kind of my internal battle that is manifested in the form of this little character. And so I guess when you get all the way down to the core of why is Trench yellow and why is Blurryface red, and go down the line, it's really hard to explain exactly why that is, just because for me those colors always were that. That's what hit me when the character of Blurryface was developing and I was coping with things. It was always the color red, and that's something that it's really tough to explain. And then the idea of yellow and the fact that we would use yellow in this world to communicate to each other and to signal to each other a sense of like-mindedness and safety. It was always yellow for me, and I don't know why it always was, but I knew that it was okay to go with these gut instincts that didn't necessarily have a lot to back it up, because if it really meant something to us at the beginning, then anyone who really wants to kind of go down this path and be a fan of the music, a fan of what we're trying to say, and the story behind it, will also feel like that it all makes sense and falls into place. So it's a bit of an ambiguous answer for you, but it's something that's kind of always been. I would say that's really hard to boil it down to one tiny idea. We wrote a whole record on the concept, so it was pretty extensive. I guess if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be when I realized that a lot of the solutions to figuring out what was going on in my own head was coming to grips with there's an antagonist, someone who's against me that I'm trying to defeat. That combined with your psyche is kind of you can kind of treat it like a map where there's areas you're coming from, there's areas you shouldn't go anymore, and there's areas you should be heading towards. And so when you treat your brain as kind of giving certain things jurisdiction, it helped me. So that kind of broad strokes was the inspiration for the whole idea of it. Yeah, no, the story, the narrative on this new record is something you could say I spent just as much time on as the music itself. There's something odd about like speaking about it into the air, because it's almost kind of meant to be hidden. It's meant to be discovered. And there was an aspect of people discovering us that started to get lost as things got bigger
and I wanted the story to be something that could be discovered again. I think in broad strokes, the narrative is really about being in between two places, feeling like you should leave one place, but you're not really sure where you're supposed to be going, where you're headed, but you know you're headed in that right direction. And I think that's a concept that a lot of people could find their own story inside of. I think we're all kind of in between those two places right now. We know where we're not supposed to be anymore, but we're not quite sure exactly what that end result is. And I think it's also important to know that at the end of the record, the song Leave the City doesn't necessarily define, and then I found the place, and here's what it's called, and here's what it's like. And that's intentional because I haven't yet. And so we can still be encouraged by that, even though I don't have that answer for you. And so that's something that I hope people get out of the record.
But on this next record, it's called Blurryface, and kind of a quick description of it. Blurryface is a character, a guy that I like to say I met in a different dimension, but really he represents everything that I as an individual and I'm insecure about. And what's cool is I know that we all, as individuals, understand we're insecure about certain things, but where our self-awareness starts to dissolve is when we start to try to understand how those insecurities affect us every day. How do we compensate for it? And so to better understand those insecurities and how they were affecting me, I wanted to create this guy who had a name, a face, a seat at the table I could look across and really address them. And so this record, it's not really I wouldn't call it a concept record, but it does have a common thread running throughout where it's really trying to address this guy and trying to defeat this guy. And I kind of came up with a backstory to him and a name and what he's like. And one of the ways that he himself manifests in the record is kind of that pitch down vocal effect, which is truly my voice just kind of run through a certain processor or whatever. But that's one of the many ways that I kind of have him show up in the record, and he represents something that I'm trying to conquer. Okay, so kind of going back towards this Blurryface character and who he is and stuff, representing those insecurities and the things that I use music to kind of help me get through certain things. For me, when I think of that emotion, I feel when a certain insecurity is overcoming me, specifically when taking a stage. You'd be surprised how hard it is to get up in front of people sometimes. And the feeling really is a sensation of suffocating. And so it kind of manifests itself in the black on the neck. And then also, I'm probably most insecure about the things that I make with my hands, whether it's music or anything that I create. I'm the sole creator of that thing. I have to answer to it, and if it's bad, it means that I'm bad. And so it's really tough to create something and show everyone this thing, and also when you're showing that person something and you're wondering whether or not they're gonna like it, it feels like the worst. So I just this Blurryface character, the way he looks, for some reason, I saw it that he would have black on his neck and his hands.
When Josh dyed his hair yellow for the Grammys, was that any type of teaser for the new era?
Next question. Maybe not intentionally, but maybe it was intentional. We like to keep it fluid up here. You never know, man.